Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you for listening to Operation Agency Freedom, where we are bringing you top secret advice from the world's most badass digital agency owners and influencers. These men and women are sharing their stories of how they have built 6, 7, and 8-figure digital agencies and how you can too. My name is Chris Martinez, CEO of Dude, where we help digital agencies by giving them the people and the processes so that they can scale profitably. Today, I am joined by my friend, one of my mentors, an awesome human being. His name is Karl Sakas from Sakas and Company. Welcome to the show, Karl.
Chris, great to be here. Good speaking with you.
Yeah, how are you doing today, man?
Good. Here in North Carolina, it's a little hot, but it is North Carolina, so that happens.
Now, North Carolina, it also gets pretty humid out there too, right?
It does, and that is where air conditioning is your best friend.
When does the humidity really start to get to you guys? Like around what time of the year?
I'd say, let's see, it depends on the year. May it's going to start up, but you're actually distracted by the large amounts of pollen. That tends to kick in, and then the humidity. So the humidity is actually a relief that, like, okay, the pollen's gone.
Ah, okay, cool. Dude, the pollen kicked my butt out here this year. Like I was literally taking the Zyrtec twice a day. Like without it, I was dying. And then luckily now, it's about, it's early June now. So it's died off. But oh my God, I was struggling this year.
Oh, no fun.
All right. Well, we start off every show with a little roundtable discussion, and I follow you on social media. I'm always seeing that you're traveling. Travel is one of the things that motivates me. It's huge with pretty much everybody here at my company. And like I was telling you earlier before we jumped on, it's one of our core values. Travel. We believe that travel is one of the world's greatest teachers. So let's talk about travel. I want you to talk about travel and the importance of that to you and your business, your life. Like, why do you love traveling? Let's just talk about that.
Yeah, well, I enjoy traveling. I've designed my business that most of my client work is done remotely. So I've worked with clients in every inhabited continent, but most of that work is remote, sometimes in person. But when it comes to traveling, it's opportunities to learn new things about myself, meet new people. As we've talked, I think before, I volunteer as a bartender on a 1930s railroad car based in DC. So certainly, you've got to check out the other cocktails out there to see what's coming out. So yeah, it's just fun, learning new things about other people, learning things about myself. I don't know, it's great.
What are some of your favorite travel destinations that you've been to?
There are always new things. I went to London, a repeat visit to London earlier this year, and that was fun. History shows, taking things in. So that was nice. When I want to unplug, one of my favorites is a cabin rental in the mountains of Virginia. It's it's sort of in the mountains. It's along a river. It's just really, really relaxing. But I'm always open to trying new things too.
Awesome. You were mentioning that your grandfather or your ancestor goes back to Hungary. Have you ever been to Hungary before? Because I went to Budapest like 2 years ago, and it's
really? I haven't been to Hungary yet. I am mostly German, so I've been to Germany a couple times. I was actually born in Germany.
You were born in Germany?
Yeah. But my parents were both in the U.S. Army, and my dad was stationed there at the time, and my mom was there too, of course. So was born there, and then came back to the U.S. a few months later, and grew up there. But I visited Germany a couple times since then, and so haven't made it to Hungary yet, though.
Where in Germany have you been? Because I've only been to Berlin. I have mixed feelings about Berlin, but that's a story for another time.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, tell me more, but I guess this
okay. Well, no, since you asked, so I this trip that I went on, I really enjoy history, and so I did a loop. I basically started in Prague in Czech Republic, went to Budapest up to Krakow in Poland, and then Krakow over to Berlin, and then Berlin back to Czech Republic, and then I flew home. And
Mm.
so, I had gone on this loop and I'm learning about World War II history. I love World War II history personally.
Ah,
And so then I get to Berlin, and of course, that was the Nazi headquarters
yeah.
during World War II. And it's cool because, obviously that was ground zero for the Nazi movement, which I just find fascinating. Not because of, obviously, I agree with anything that they did, but what really fascinates me is just the way that they were able to manipulate people and how so many people just bought it. I mean, typically, these are normal, good-hearted people that got involved with the Nazi movement, and not many people stood up to try and stop them inside of Germany. And so, being there, it was really cool to learn that and see the history, but the whole city had been flattened. And
Mm,
Berlin in general is a very flat geographically city.
mm.
And so, there weren't as many like landmarks that I was able to see. And then just to me, it was too big of a city for me to get a feel for. Like, I like to feel
Uh,
what the locals feel. And I was there for 3 or 4 days. So
mhm.
I feel like, if I was there for like a month or 2 months, I
Yeah.
would have been able to find my pocket of Berlin that was like
Uh,
me. But instead I was trying to like see a bunch of stuff in a short amount of time. And I just didn't really get the sense for the city. So that's kind of like one of the reasons why I didn't have the best experience in Berlin.
I mean, I guess that's one of those. It's tough whenever you visit a place that has a lot going on. It's hard. You're not going to see everything.
Yep.
One of my takeaways from a trip to Australia last year was there for about three weeks, and I found I was in different cities for a few days, and then that wasn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
It and also just sort of the packing and unpacking. It's not as much fun. So for the most recent trip, I was in London for a week, did a day trip to Paris and back. In
Mm-hmm.
the middle of that, obviously, a day or less than a day in Paris, you could certainly spend far more than that. But I figured, okay, let's get a taste of things, and then I can visit for a longer trip. The good news is, during that week or so, I wasn't packing and unpacking, and that was nice.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's get into your story, man. That's the whole reason why you're here. So let's start from the beginning. How did you get started in this crazy industry of running an agency, helping agencies what you are doing now. So,
Mhm.
start from the beginning and give us the story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I have been a consultant since high school. I learned HTML back in the days of dial-up,
Okay.
and started a business as a freelance web designer and technology consultant. So have been in digital marketing for a long time, and also business. You could say is in my blood. I'm a fourth generation business owner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I grew up after my parents were in the army. After they retired, they had a small rental property business, and so I was helping in that from a very early age. So, like in elementary school, like helping with tenant turnover clean out. Like people had moved out. It's like got to get
Mhm.
the unit ready to go. Should I have been doing that in elementary school?
I think yes.
Probably.
I
Well,
think yes.
it
I don't
built
have kids.
character, as they said, it built character. So for sure, but I could see them negotiating with tenants,
Yep.
or the clients. I could see them negotiating with vendors. I could see them making decisions about what makes sense, what makes doesn't make sense, and so that was a great exposure. One of my grandfathers was a business professor at
Hmm.
Cornell for 40 some years,
Hmm.
and he was a consultant. So I'd hear his stories about flying all over the world to consult with big companies. His focus was, today we'd call it organizational behavior.
Hmm.
How can companies work more effectively with their employees? I found some research of his in the 1950s. He found, based on his research, employees wanted to be treated as people rather than just workers.
Yeah, or
I'm
like
like, well,
like a cog in a wheel. Like they want
exactly.
to feel like they're a part of something, that their
It's like
work matters.
we've known that for a long time, but still other companies struggle with that.
Hmm.
And then more recently served as the head of business operations at one agency and then another, and ultimately decided in 2013 to put all of that experience together to launch what's now Sakas and Company. Since then, I've worked with hundreds of agencies, every inhabited continent, and really enjoy it.
That's awesome. I want to share this because I just read this like this morning. I read a statistic that 40% of people will disengage from a company that they work for if they're feeling completely ignored. And
Mm-hmm.
22% of people will disengage from a company if they're getting negatively criticized, which means that people would rather be negatively criticized in their company
Yeah.
than to be ignored, which I found fascinating. And then I think that the other statistic is only 1% of people will disengage if you give them praise. So
Mm.
really, really interesting stuff.
Well, that reminds me of, one of the points in Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Mm-hmm.
One of the comments is, as soon as you start criticizing someone, they
Yep.
just stop listening. They shut down. They're not. Now, you do need to give constructive feedback to people, but sort of think it through. And also deliver the feedback kind of earlier and over time rather than suddenly unloading on one of your team members because it's built up. And if you haven't said anything, your team cannot read your mind.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I learned that myself because I'm like, well, why didn't you do that? And then I'm like, because I didn't tell them. Like I didn't
Right.
express what I
Right.
didn't give them the expectation. It's my fault. All
Yeah.
right. So let's talk about the agencies that you're working with right now.
Mhm.
And like, what are some of the things that they're coming to you with and how are you helping them?
Yeah. Well, they're typically digitally oriented, either
Mhm.
100% digital or digitally focused, anywhere from one person just getting started to as many as 700 employees.
Mhm.
Most are under 100 typically. And I would say that they're running into what I would categorize as growing pains. So I'm
Mhm.
hearing things like last year our revenue doubled, but our profit margins are down, or things like I'm losing key employees and I'm not sure exactly what the problem is, and I'm worried more people are going to leave too, but I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Or how do I find the right clients rather than just the ones that maybe I already know, that kind of thing. So those growing pains is a theme, but it's ultimately around strategy, operations, and leadership.
And where do you find most agencies are struggling?
It varies. Oftentimes, they're struggling around profit margins.
Mhm.
And I have an article on this, the idea of an agency value chain. There
Mhm.
are 12 steps where you can either be adding or removing value. For instance, if your positioning is bad, everything else is going to suffer after that. On the other hand, maybe you do a great job and then you're not sending invoices promptly or not collecting the invoices. Everything you did sooner is going to fall apart. So there's this idea of profit leaks. If your agency's pre-tax net profit margins aren't 20 to 30%, if they're below that, you've got a profit leak.
Mhm.
And if you're significantly above it, it may be a sign that you are understaffed. There are some models where that can work, but if you're making less than 20%, and that includes after market rate owner compensation, if you're making less than 20% net margins, you've got profit leaks. You don't need to fix them, but assuming, like, for most of my clients, your agency is either your number one or number two financial asset, either
Yes.
because you plan to sell it or you need it to pump out above market compensation and solid profits for the rest of your career. I don't know. I would recommend you find and fix those profit leaks.
Now, a lot of agency owners that I meet that are having these types of challenges that you call
Mhm.
profit leaks,
Yep.
like it's just that wasn't the motivation when they started their agency. They love doing the work.
No. No. Yeah.
So, how do you kind of help people to see the light that these things are important?
Hmm. Well, I mean, the goal is to look at ways to help demonstrate how it's relevant to them.
Hmm.
For instance, a client talked about how she was overwhelmed by a number of things going on.
Hmm.
And during our coaching call, I helped her sort through and prioritize and sort out next steps on key items. And I checked in at the end of the call and asked how she was feeling compared to where she was really stressed out before. And she said I had helped her calm the chaos and that
Awesome.
she was going to sleep better that night. And in fact, the rest of the week as well. That was really nice to hear. So I think it's going to vary by person. If someone thinks that they don't need to focus on the business side of their agency, they're probably not going to hire me in the first place, right? Because I, I can't help you be a better designer or a better developer. or a better marketing strategist for your clients.
Mm-hmm.
But I can help you get all of the business stuff that has to happen, get that business stuff out of the way, so that you can focus on what you enjoy more.
So what would you say are some, like, if you had to pick the top 3 most common areas of waste
Mm-hmm.
and inefficiency within an agency, what would you say that those are?
Underestimating work. So you're undercharging in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good. Another would be over servicing. So a client is paying you for a certain amount, or maybe they're paying certain hours, but you're not billing them for all of the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good. And beyond that, a lack of monitoring around how your team is doing the work. You know, if you have no idea what people are doing, or if you don't know that someone is waiting on work to do and they're, twiddling their thumbs, that all adds up.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes get the question of, do I need to track time at my agency? I would say if your margins are 20 to 30%, you're doing fine. You don't need to. But if you're getting like 5% profit margins, you probably have some problems there. But ultimately, regardless of how you price it, there are 3 pricing models for agencies: hourly, milestone, and value based.
Mm-hmm.
Your team's time is the inventory of the agency, and if you're not getting the most from that inventory, within reason, of course, you don't want people working 100 hours a week. That you're paying people whether they're working or not.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the things that we've been looking at. So for a long time, we've got over 30 employees here. And we thought that we were doing good. We're just assuming that everything's going well. And then, sometimes we look at the financial statements at the end of the month and we're like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
So we put some systems in place, use this technology that we were paying for, and now we're able to look exactly. So I can tell you exactly to the penny how much money we're making with each of our clients, because I can, track hours of service, client revenue, all that good stuff. So it's
that's
really, really helpful for us.
It's not to say you should never do work for free. I describe some things as strategically free. That's where you say to the client, hey, we enjoy working with you. We actually had an opening to get this done, sooner than we would, so we aren't going to charge the rush fee.
Mm-hmm.
Or, we had this opening to do this or that, and, as a special thing, we're not going to charge for it. That's okay if it's strategically free, but if it is secretly free, that's not good. In an extreme case, I worked with an agency on the East Coast of the U.S. Several years ago, and the owner said, I'm having a number of problems. Can you help? And so I visited his office, did an on-site with them, and there were a lot of problems. One of the things that stood out was that they weren't keeping track of commitments to clients as they were matched to what was actually happening and getting billed. And actually, there was one point where, based on my analysis, one of their clients had cut their retainer significantly, but no one told the delivery team.
Ooh.
And so for 2 months, based on my calculations, they were officially charging, $125, $150 an hour. For 2 months, one of their clients got all the work for an average of $5 an hour.
That's great if you're the client.
But you know what? The client probably didn't even realize that the work, wasn't adjusted. That is one of the risks if you take on too many clients beyond what your agency can handle.
Well, that's a great, that leads me to a great question. It's like, how do you determine whether you have too many clients?
Well, I recommend targeting 10 to 20 active clients at once. You don't want fewer than 10, because then you're going to have a client concentration problem. Yep. Someone who's more than 20% of your revenue. I mean, you could have that problem in any circumstance, but under 10, it's likely. When you get above 20, it becomes hard to provide an appropriate level of attention to each client.
Mm-hmm.
Either things slip and, you're like, oh, I haven't given them an update in 2 weeks about what's going on, and they're wondering what's going on. Or you can also have, I think of it as client dilution as the opposite of client concentration. With client dilution, you might have a client who's paying, half of 1% of your revenue, but is demanding, 2% of your team's time. they're not paying for that. And that, in that example, that 1.5% difference, you could have deployed that to a client who is far higher value. And so when you have more than 20, and usually it's like 25, 30 plus clients, things slip through the cracks. In the example of the $5 an hour agency, they had as many as 100 clients. They had dropped to 80, and the owner was like, "How do I get back to 100?" And I was like, "Well, why do you want to get to 100?" I'm thinking he already has too many already. And he was like, "Well, then I'll make more money." And I have an article on my site around when I talk about client count, looking at how you can be a sizable agency with 20 clients. The key is ultimately to keep levering up the client size. So, your largest client today might be one of your smaller clients 3 years from now. But
Interesting.
you have to be intentional about it. That's not to say that a high client count can't work. It can work if you have a pod structure that's working effectively. But I think too often people are like, well, let's just keep throwing clients in and keep the structure you've got, and your margins don't lie. If you're paying yourself market rate compensation, that is 6 figures and up for each owner involved in the business. And if based on that you're not getting 20 to 30% net before taxes, you probably you've got some leaks, and
Mhm.
your client count's a problem.
So let's say that there's somebody out there who already has 60 clients.
Mhm.
Let's say they have a pod structure serving each, 10 to 20. Let's just say, actually, let's make the math a little bit easier.
Mhm.
Let's say that there's 45 clients. They've got a team servicing 15, 15, 15.
Mhm.
At what point should they look at adding on another team? Is
Mm.
there a formula for that?
It's going to depend on how you've structured it. So
Okay.
usually a pod is going to have an account manager or someone who's functioning as an account manager / project manager. I
Mhm.
do believe those are separate roles. Depending on the size of your team, you may combine them. But the PM is more about the internal side. The AM is more about the external and upsell side.
Mhm.
But you've got someone who's, coordinating things to some extent. And then you're going to have subject matter experts. Those are going to vary depending on what your agency does. Maybe it's a designer. Maybe it's a couple developers. Maybe it's a strategist, and instead of if you're not doing development work, maybe it's people who are doing implementation around marketing tactics.
Okay.
So you're going to have that group. The biggest limiter to how many accounts you're going to manage does come into account management and project management. If you've got an account manager who is just the client facing person, they could probably handle they could handle 15 accounts if they are not doing project management, if there's a separate project manager handling all the internal work. On the other hand, if you have a scenario where one person is handling all of the client communication and all of the internal communication, I mean, their ideal number is probably less than 10. It might even be 4. I
Okay.
mean, it depends on the client size.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's not a direct benchmark. So it depends on how you've structured it. I would say though, if you're doing a pod structure, don't max out the pods to capacity before you start looking at adding a new pod, because then everyone's going to be at 100%. And then suddenly you're going to have a pod that's starting at 0%, or maybe 10%. You start with one client, something like that. All of the clients are going to be used to working with the people in their original pod, and then now you're telling them, I'm sending you off here to someone you don't know who doesn't know your business,
Hmm.
and all that. So it's a balancing act. Utilization is one of the hardest things in running an agency, and that's
Yes.
why ideally you have some sort of an operations person internally helping you monitor and balance all of that.
So, what if it's a solopreneur type of agency environment and they don't
Mhm.
have all these people? I mean, what things can they do
Mhm.
to try and build up their agency? Like, is there a first hire that they should make, or what are the steps that you
Mm.
recommend?
So just to confirm on the assumptions, you've got an individual who's
Mhm.
the figurehead of the agency, and they're also doing the work. So this would be sort of who's the second person they'd bring in?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, based on what you
Mhm.
told me, it sounds like that they need to start, to accommodate. Because there are some people
Mhm.
who've started an agency and it's just them, and
Yep.
they've got 20 clients just on their own.
Yeah.
Which it sounds like that. Well, I personally believe that that's a very dangerous position to be in,
Yeah.
because if you get sick, everything falls apart.
Yep.
So what's like the very first step that they should take to try and build out this infrastructure without having to compromise on their salary or any
Yep.
of that stuff?
Well, here, when someone is like, okay, who do I hire next? They're typically one of three roles that
Hmm.
they're considering. One would be to hire a salesperson.
Hmm.
That's if the owner doesn't like sales themselves and they want someone else to do that. If you've got 20 clients, you probably need to focus elsewhere first. You also might be interested in hiring a subject matter expert. That's
Hmm.
my catch-all term for designer, developer, copywriter, strategist, that kind of thing.
Okay.
The key there is they're highly billable. But if you're handling 20 clients by yourself, you're probably going to have some freelancers helping you get things done. So in that case, that leaves the third role, the people in that scenario when they're asking me for help are often considering, which is a project manager.
Hmm.
And the idea there is that the project manager is coordinating all of the commitments to the 20 clients, although hopefully you can lower that count because I bet you've got some tiny clients in that 20 that are a bit of a distraction.
Hmm.
But in that case, the project manager probably makes the most sense to help you stay on top of things. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Oh, I would absolutely agree with you. And I'm actually thinking about one person in particular.
Ah.
Yeah, so it's a Facebook ad agency owner.
Mhm.
He's doing a little over $250,000 a year. So it's not
Mhm.
tiny, but and it's just him. Like literally, I think he has like a part-time assistant, or if I can remember
Mhm.
correctly, I think the girlfriend's kind of helping. But he's running all
Okay.
campaigns, he's setting up everything. And so, I was just kind of giving him some advice, because obviously we both recognize that this thing could fall apart very, very easily. Like you get into
Yeah.
a bike accident or whatever, and you're out of
Yeah.
commission, this thing's going to fall apart. And so, his argument, well, it was, I need more salespeople so that I can then get operations people. And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I would kind of think the other way, because it's a lot of the times people feel like it's a chicken or the egg type of scenario. What would you
Yeah.
recommend to this guy?
Well, I mean, I think some of it depends on how overloaded and stressed out is he now. If he's stressed out by the workload,
Not he.
that's
It wasn't really. He wasn't really stressed out. That's
oh,
the
oh,
thing.
okay, all
Like he
right.
wasn't
That so
feeling like the
that
walls were
that
caving in, or like he was a
that's good.
slave to the agency.
I I guess I would say look at what are the biggest gaps between what needs to happen because yes, sales do need to happen,
Mm-hmm.
project management does need to happen, the actual work, the sort of the SME type work needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are the things that only he can do? Uh, and ideally, anything that is off that list. So, like the work he's doing, say, in sales conversations with prospective clients.
Well,
That's probably,
from my
yeah.
perspective, there's nothing that he was doing that only he could do.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I don't know. Well, it sounds like we need to patch him into the show and do a live consult. But I would say, if you're in a situation where you're doing all these things, um, I talk about the idea of $1,000 an hour activities,
Mm-hmm.
things that only you could do as the owner. Ideally, get other things off your plate.
Yeah.
It's harder to replace. Say, if you're doing speaking on behalf of your agency as the owner,
Yeah.
there's a lot behind the owner as the speaker. On the other hand, clients don't always know who's doing the actual execution. That is more invisible to clients. That can be easier to outsource. So start with what needs to happen. What do you like doing? What don't you like doing? I'm not saying take on all of the things you dislike doing, but it does have to get done by someone.
Yeah, I would say, another way to look at it, because if you talked to probably this guy and you said, "Hey,
Hmm.
what are all the things that you're doing that are less than $1,000 an hour?" And he'd be like, "Well,
Hmm.
nothing I'm doing is $1,000 an hour." That therein is
Uh-huh.
the problem, because you are not
Yeah.
focusing as a CEO and working on anything that's value is $1,000 an hour. And
Here's the first thing I'd recommend he do, and if you're in this scenario, and even if you're solo or not, for people listening, um, make a list of all your clients, like export them from your accounting software, and rank them by net revenue. So the net revenue would be looking at what you keep, right? If they're paying $1 million a year, but 900,000 of that is going straight to Facebook or Bing or Google, okay, that doesn't count. It's
Yeah.
100,000. But look at your services revenue, rank it by largest to smallest, and then start adding up the column and see, okay, how many of your clients are producing 50% of your revenue? How many of your clients are producing 80% of your revenue? I bet there are a ton of clients at the bottom of the list who get their own row, but they are tiny compared to the people at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Also, take a look around how much attention are they demanding. I mentioned that example of 0.5% of your revenue getting 2% of your time or more of your team's time. You probably want to consider firing the smallest clients or transitioning them away, referring them away,
Yep.
so that you can focus on the bigger clients and grow them. Because if you grow them, there's more money to help pay for additional help. But if you're so overloaded by the number of clients, like this is the semester I tried taking 18 credits
Mm-hmm.
instead of 15 in college, but yeah, it was sort of extra, but there were all these little classes. There was, one credit lab, one credit kinesiology course that I was just too scattered,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so then I dropped down to the regular there.
And you probably did better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Awesome. All right, Karl, we are out of time. I want to thank you so much for joining us on the call today. What is the best way for people to get in contact with you?
If you visit my website, Sakas and Company, that's SAKASAND, the word company.com, I have hundreds of articles with free advice about dealing with growing pains at your agency, including a free weekly tips newsletter to help you grow more smoothly, more profitably. And if you want to connect on LinkedIn or find me on Twitter, I'm at Karl Sakas on Twitter. Would love to help point you to some resources that would make your life easier.
Awesome. And who would be the perfect person to reach out to you today?
The perfect person in terms of the sort of the profile of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Probably, if you've been growing your agency and you have, say, you're at the point of maybe 20 plus people, and you feel like, okay, you've done a good job growing to this point, but you're starting to have some growing pains. What worked before isn't working anymore, and you can see where you want to go, but you're not sure how to get there. Uh, I could probably help, and if I can't, I'll point you to someone who'd be better fit.
Awesome. I appreciate the honesty there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on the call today, Karl. Again, Karl Sakas with Sakas and Company. If you're listening to this and anything that he said has resonated with you, please reach out to him. To all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in today, and make sure you return next Thursday and every Thursday for the next episode of Operation Agency Freedom. Bye-bye, everybody.